Hey there guys, Pastor Gary here once again, and we are going off-road, part of our study as we're cruising our way through the 66 books of the Bible, which we call, looking over my left, Study 66. This is the special feature portion where we kind of break down a particular book, in this case 2 Samuel. Now, I don't know about you, but 2 Samuel is one of those books that is so full and so rich with story after story. And of course, most centering right around David's life. In fact, the setting for this book is the kingdom and the time period as David was king. It's about a 40-year period of time that we're talking about here. So I find it to be very significant. Now, you may say, well, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, well, what's the difference? Well, actually, in the Hebrew Bible, it was all one book. It was just called Samuel. It wasn't until we get to the Greek Bible, the Septuagint, that they decided they were going to separate the two books, and that's why we have what we have. And so the author, it was a compilation of authors, if we could say it that way. And of course, we have Nathan, we had Gad, his son Egad. I thought that was funny. And then we have, of course, Samuel himself, who wrote much of this too. So just giving you an idea of who wrote and why they wrote it. So again, as I said before, what's the setting? What's going on? What's the summary of events of this wonderful book called 2 Samuel? Well, David hears about the defeat of Saul to the Philistines. Remember, Saul was king, and now he's been defeated. And not only Saul, but of course 3 of Saul's 4 sons, and including Jonathan, which David and Jonathan were very close. They had a very deep, meaningful relationship is what they had there. And so David does what David does best. He's a great and mighty warrior, no doubt about it. But David also is sort of a Renaissance guy. And you know, we attribute 70 Psalms to David, a songwriter. And David, of course, writes a song about the defeat of Saul and what happened there. Now, you could think, well, maybe David would be elated about this because, let's face it, he's going to now become the man. But David doesn't take it that way. In fact, David's very sad. And in fact, if you read through the book of 2 Samuel, you'll find out that the person that dispatched or supposedly dispatched Saul there on Mount Gilboa, when he comes back and tells David what he did, David has him killed. And so anyway, what happens next is David is told by the Lord to go to Hebron. Now, that may sound familiar. Hebron's a very significant city and much importance in the scriptures. And David is told by the Lord to go there, where he will rule for a while from there, in sort of the southern kingdom, I guess you could say. And another person that was called to go to Hebron 1,000 years earlier was a man named Abraham. So it has great significance in the history of Israel, no doubt about it there. So anyway, he gets anointed as basically the leader of the southern tribe of Judah right there. And Saul's chief commander, his name is Abner. This was the guy that commanded his armies. The man that commanded David's armies was a man named Joab. So you have Joab commanding David's. You had Abner commanding Saul's, is what you had. So Abner consolidates the support of the northern portion of Israel is what he does. And he puts Ishbosheth into Saul's former position of ruling and reigning in the northern portion of the kingdoms, is what he would do. Ishbosheth, an interesting name there. His name originally was something along the line of Eshbaal, and Eshbaal means the gift to Baal. Now, that's kind of a weird name to think about, but that was his name at that point. And then, of course, Ishbosheth itself means to be a man of shame, is what that means. And so he's the king of Israel. David is kind of ruling in the south, is what's going on. So you can imagine there will be battles between them, these two conflicting regimes. And it was weird. They'd have these battles, but most of the time it was these hand-to-hand contests but between smaller portions of the army. It's kind of interesting to see that. So Abner's men and Joab's men in general were doing those things. At one point, though, Ishbosheth just foolishly accuses Abner, his general, his lead general, of doing something treacherous, I guess you could say. And he accuses him of it, and Abner takes great homage. He's very upset. He's undone by this. He thinks, how in the world could you possibly accuse me of such a thing? And so he defects from basically working with Ishbosheth, and he says, I'm going to go to work for David. Now that sounds like it's not a bad plan, but there's going to be some things that come as that. Now David does welcome Abner at first, and Abner convinces the other tribes to recognize David's claim to the throne. So Abner's saying, hey, listen, follow David now. Even though Abner didn't, Abner in fact put the other person into power. Now Abner's had a change of heart is what he's done. So Joab, though, is seeking revenge, and he actually will kill Abner for a couple reasons. One is because Abner killed Joab's brother, Asai. He had him killed. And even after Abner pleaded with him, he was being pursued by him. He said, listen, you don't need to do this. No need to get into senseless bloodshed here. Yet still, Asai continued anyway, and Abner eventually killed him. So Joab wanted to kill Abner for that. Plus, Joab didn't like the fact that Abner was taking a place of prestige under David also. Joab was a very jealous individual, a very violent man. Capable general, but a violent person. So he seeks revenge. He basically kills Abner, and Joab does also. So Joab's not a real great guy. David told Joab not to kill Abner, yet he still does that. And so that's all right here. You get a real sense that you're looking at a soap opera or something like that in this particular venture. That's for sure. And so David publicly censures, I guess you could say is the best word, Joab for doing what he did to Abner. And so anyway, it's a very tenuous is a better word, position to take when it comes to that. So anyway, at the same time, Ishbosheth now has lost Abner. Abner's dead. And so what happens, a few of Ishbosheth's men betray Ishbosheth, and they go to his palace where he's lying down at noon. It's very hot, and he found a cool spot, and they go in and they kill him. They stab him in the stomach, and then they take his head, cut it off, and they take the head down to David, thinking again that David would be pleased. David said, why'd you kill an innocent man? And again, he had those people killed because of what they did. He publicly executed these men, is what he did. And I can't remember their names off the top of my head. It was Rechab, I think, or Rechab is the one name, and Baanah is, I think, the other name. But anyway, won't really matter. No test after this. And so that just gives you an idea of who these people are. And so he has them executed. Now the tribes have all come together, and this has been a major event. Ishbosheth's gone, the kingdom's gone there, and so David now is considered the united king, is what he is. Now we know that you'll have David on a united kingdom, you'll have Solomon over a united kingdom, but once Solomon's son comes to power, we know the kingdom will be divided once again. And so David is going to lead the people in conquering the Jebusites for the city of Jerusalem. This is a Canaanite place, and yet David goes in there and takes it over. He erects his palace there is what he's going to do. He's going to call it the city of David, or Zion. So now David is growing in power is what he's doing. And what is going to happen now is you had at one point that northern area where Ishbosheth was over. You had the southern area where David was ruling, but all along the side you still had the Philistines, the ever-present enemy of Israel. So now David is feeling full of himself. He's consolidated power, and he is going to, with the help of about 30,000 Israelites and the Ark of the Covenant that he's bringing in, he is going to fight against these Philistines also. And he does. He gets the ark. He brings it back in a very elaborate procession. There's a whole story right there. And we'll get into that maybe on Sunday morning. And so all the shouting, all the music, everything that's going on, you now have King David, who is dancing, as it says, mightily before the Lord. Some people believe it means naked. No, he had an ephod, a kind of a girdle kind of thing on that he was dancing in. And he is out in front of the ark, and he's so celebratory of the ark coming in to the city. And there is one person not really happy, and that, of course, is Michal, and that is his wife. And she's not real excited. This is Saul's daughter, and she's not real happy about the whole procession with what David is doing. And David, of course, looks at it and says, I'm making a permanent home for the Ark of the Covenant. And so everything seems to be right there. Seems to be what's going on. What's going on in this particular time and place. So God says, you've got the ark, my presence is there with you now, and that's all good. And so David, along with Joab, his general, the mean guy, the violent guy, they subdue everybody around them, basically. Again, unprecedented time in the nation of Israel as they take control of the surrounding areas. The expanding of Israel is going on right now with their borders. And so they're developing some diplomatic relationships with these neighboring kingdoms. This is all very important in the time that David is king. So David now, everything is coming into place. He's subduing the nations around him, bringing them all into line. Israel is growing. Their wealth and power, their prestige among the world is growing. So what happens? Well, you have to be very careful. When things are going so well in your life, you better believe that the enemy wants to come along and maybe attach a temptation to your life. The scripture says that in the time of the spring, when the kings would go off to war, David wasn't going off to war. Why? Because everything was going so well. Joab was defeating enemies, and everything was going like clockwork. David was up on his palace wall, and he's walking along there, and one day he watches a woman who was bathing from the rooftop of his palace, is what he's doing. So he basically sins for this woman. He finds out what he wants to find out. David's a powerful man. Who's going to question David for doing what he wants to do and how he wants to do it? Well, God's going to question him, that's for sure. And so he has relations with her, and as a result of that, she becomes pregnant, is what she does. And so he's not necessarily able to disguise what's going on here or anything like that. The woman is married, and so through a series of events, and you guys know, when he tried to get Uriah the Hittite to sleep with his wife, and Uriah refused. How can I go in and sleep with my wife when these wonderful men are out in the fields and they're fighting on behalf of the king? I won't do it, kind of a thing. And so David tried all kinds of ways, and none of them would work, and trying to get Uriah to unfortunately try to get Uriah to pose as, or to do the husbandly duties, I guess you could say. That wasn't happening. And so David unfortunately decides that it was time for plan seemingly D in this case, and he has Uriah killed on the battlefield. He tells Joab, when the battle gets heated, you send Uriah. Uriah, a good man, faithful man, loyal man to David, and unfortunately he is killed. And so what does David do? He continues the facade, the charade, and he marries Bathsheba, the woman that he unfortunately committed infidelity with and got her pregnant. But Nathan the prophet comes along, and Nathan, of course, a man, and this is one of the interesting times in the scriptures. Nathan comes along and tells a parable. He sits David down and says, David, I want to tell you something about a wealthy man who steals a poor man's only prized sheep. And he goes through the story, and David becomes outraged by such selfishness. He says this man should be killed, going on and on and on. The indignation that he has about this wrongdoing this rich man committed against this poor man. And then Nathan points his finger at David and says, David, you're that man. That's exactly what you are. That's what you did with Uriah. And unfortunately for David, he had been found out. Now, this is interesting because sometimes we say, when someone is found out and we tell them and they're sorry, we go, you're only sorry because you got found out. Well, David got found out, and but he's truly sorry. He truly repents. And if you want to know more about that, read Psalms 51, and you'll read about David's repentance for his wrongdoing. He fasted, he prayed over Bathsheba's child that was going to, his child with Bathsheba, but the son dies anyway. He got sick, and he died anyway, is what he did during childbirth. Now, afterward, David and Bathsheba will have another son. Do you remember who that son is? Of course, that's Solomon is who that is. And David's older son, Amnon, will fall in love with his half-sister Tamar, and unfortunately, he will force himself on her. He will rape her is what he'll do. David's furious about the whole thing, but he won't do anything. David is not a great dad. Not a great dad at all. Never sets any standards, it seems like, and he was a pushover for these young people, that's for sure. But Tamar's brother, Absalom, invites Amnon out to the country. Amnon, of course, is the person that rapes Tamar. And so he invites Amnon to come out to visit with him. And where he and David's other sons will murder Amnon is what they'll do. But Absalom flees to a city. I think it's Geshur is where he flees to. It's about 70 miles away from Jerusalem. And so David's upset and everything else. After he mourns for Amnon and the death of Amnon, he invites Absalom to come back to Jerusalem. It'll be about 3 years before he comes back, but he will eventually come back to Jerusalem. So at this point, he brings Absalom back. Absalom now forms an army, sweet-talking people, bringing people together. It said that he would go down to the gates and talk to people. He would complain a little bit about David. David doesn't seem to want to meet the needs of you guys anymore, but I'm here, and I'll be the one that meets your needs. And so what's he doing? He's stealing the hearts of the people away from King David is what he's doing. He is unfortunately inserting himself into where David should have been and doing what he should. So Absalom is plotting a conspiracy is what he's doing against David, his own father. And so now part of David's former, Ahithophel, if you remember Ahithophel, who was the chief counselor for David, he also will go over and support Absalom is what he's going to do. And part of that is because Ahithophel's granddaughter is Bathsheba. And so he sees what David is doing with Bathsheba, and he has lost his faith in David also. So the conspiracy is plotted, it's launched, and David has to flee from Jerusalem with his men, and the people of the countryside weep as he marches by. They see what's going on. They see what's happening. David was loved. One of Saul's relatives, Shimei, if you remember him, as David walked by, he was shouting insults at David, throwing stones at David. Some of David's mighty men wanted to go over and dispatch him, and David said, no, you just let him continue on. He continued to throw stones, he continued to curse him, gloating over David's demise is what he's doing. But David forbid anyone to do anything. So we know that Absalom will enter Jerusalem. First thing he does in an act of defiance is he fools around. He has sex with David's concubines is what he does. David shouldn't have had concubines. He had a problem with women, no doubt about it. Absalom does the same thing. So then Absalom's aides, they come around him, and they say, Ahithophel, one of them saying, David's at a weak point. You need to go attack him. You need to destroy him right now. That's what you need to do. You need to drop the hammer on him, because if you don't, he's going to gather, he's going to regain strength, he's going to come after you. So that's what Ahithophel said to Absalom. But one of David's officials, who kind of snuck under the wire, presented himself sort of as a traitor to David. He went into Absalom. His name was Hushai. And Hushai pretended to support Absalom, and he persuades Absalom to wait. And the reason he did that was, he said, David's like an animal. You got to give him time to, he's wounded. He'll be a fierce. If you give him a little time, you'll be able to take him without a problem. Is what Hushai said to Absalom. And what he was doing was he was giving David a chance to kind of gather his army, his troops, and everything else. Ahithophel knew this was wrong. But Ahithophel said, basically, I don't have Absalom's ear any longer. This Hushai does. He went home and killed himself is what he did. And so a lot of death in this, a lot of things going on here that are just crazy, And so at this point, David does muster his army. His forces kill 20,000 of Absalom's followers in the forests of Ephraim. and Absalom is riding along, and he catches his hair in the branches of a tree. Joab, who ignores David's instructions because he is a fierce man, he ignores him, and he will drive 3 spears into Absalom's body as Absalom is being hung up by his hair. David's told of this, and what does he do? He weeps over Absalom's death, screaming repeatedly, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Now, this leads to to David's faithful followers being very upset, and Joab will say to David, "David, you seem to be more about Absalom, and what you're siding with them. We're defending you, and we're doing these things that you don't seem to understand. That you don't seem to realize what we're doing for you, and we're putting our lives at risk for you." And they became very indignant with David too. But David, of course, crying out. David takes it upon himself. He blamed himself for what Absalom had become and so forth. So that's just a little nugget of this book. I mean, there's so much in this book. And it's a real study of the human heart. It's a real study of power. It's a real study of betrayal, loyalty, anything and everything, murder, intrigue. It's all there. You know, you could write, you could make a major motion picture of this life without a doubt. In fact, Hollywood has done that a couple times. But really, really interesting stuff here as we look at it. And the key to this book, let me just give you this: 2 Samuel 7:16. "Your house and your kingdom shall endure before me forever. Your throne shall be established forever." This is what we just witnessed in this story of betrayal from Absalom, David's own son. But see, David makes it through. Saul has been dispatched, his throne dispatched. Absalom trying to usurp the power of David. Ishbosheth, the same thing. They're all gone. David's the one who continues on, and he continues on this day because Jesus Christ is going to take up the throne of David when he returns. So I hope you enjoyed this little off-road venture that we just witnessed, and I hope that you come out Sunday morning to one of our services, and we will continue, and we will tear more apart in this wonderful book of 2 Samuel. Be blessed today, enjoy it, and make sure you're reading 2 Samuel this week.